amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello and welcome, listeners. Today my guest is Tony Mowbray, the author of a terrific book, Never Ever Give In. Tony is one of Australia's premier international motivational and inspirational speakers. In 1998, he and his crew competed in the Sydney to Hobart yacht race in the worst conditions in its 64-year history, where sadly 6 sailors died. Tony's yacht, Solo Globe Challenge, suffered a monumental knockdown in killer waves tall enough to engulf a 10-storey building, lost its mast, and some of his crew had to be rescued by helicopter. However, that didn't put Tony off sailing. For less than a year later, he sailed solo, non-stop and unassisted around the world, spending 181 days alone at sea. And then, to top it all off, he and his crew once again sailed the Sydney to Hobart yacht race. And there is so much more, but first let's find out where it all began for Tony. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks very much, Rosemary. It sounds like someone else you're talking about, but I've got to say.
Oh, well, we shall see. Tony, you grew up in Belmont on Lake Macquarie in New South Wales, I think where your father worked in the coal mines, and you played rugby league and cricket. So tell us a little bit what that was like.
Look, I had a great upbringing. I have no regrets whatsoever. I'd do it all again. You're right. My father was 50 years of age when I was born, and he went down to work underground in a coal mine when he was 14 in 1920. And 46 years later, he came out, sort of thing, retired compulsorily. We're real salt of the earth people, us Mowbrays.
Yes, as you say, sadly he died when you were very young. But tell us about Snapey and that spinnaker pole that started your love of sailing.
Well, my dad actually didn't pass away until I was 26.
Oh, right.
But Mum was 17 years his junior, and Mum was a very, very determined person. And when I was 11, going to primary school, my mathematics was suffering a little bit, and Mum being always on the front foot and very proactive, she arranged for me to go to after-hours mathematics tuition with Bob Snape. Mum was currently babysitting his very young children at the time, who were like just babies. And so I sat in Bob's lounge room at my very first lesson and pen poised and ready to understand Pythagoras' theorem. Right? And I looked in the corner and there was this long skinny thing in the corner standing up, and I said to him, "Mr. Snape, what's that long skinny thing in the corner?" And he answered, "Well, that's a spinnaker pole off my yacht that I have to repair." And my young ears pricked, and I looked up and I said, "So you've got a yacht, have you?" And that was the beginning. And so the very next Sunday, I rode my push bike down to the Lake Macquarie Yacht Club at Belmont and parked it out the front of the club. And I can still remember clearly doing that.
Oh.
And I walked around the side of the club, and there was his little 26-foot yacht, and looked at it in the water. And I remember thinking to myself, it's not quite as big as what I thought it was going to be. But that was the start.
That was Odin, wasn't it?
Correct. The name of the boat was Odin, and I spent a few years sailing on Odin with Bob and his wife Ellen at the time, and it was such a formative time for me, and it created a real platform for me to springboard into my future life in so many ways.
Oh, how lovely. You moved on to a 37-foot yacht rival after that, I think, Tony, didn't you?
Yeah, my first big boat, proper big boat that I sailed on was a boat called Rival. I think I was only about 13 or 14, and it was on the lake here. And it was owned by a fellow called Albie Bergen, and Rival had won the 1961 Sydney to Hobart race. So there's a fair bit of history about the boat, and that was my first big boat sail when I was 13 or 14.
Oh, how wonderful. And you sailed in your first Sydney to Hobart when you were just 18. And I think that was on Peter Rundle's Cardinal Puff, is that right?
Yeah, Peter Rundle is still alive, and Peter was a very successful businessman here in Newcastle, and he had been born and bred into offshore yacht racing. He had his own little yacht at that stage. He was into his 30s, little 30-footer, and I managed to get a ride as the junior member of a 5-person crew in 1973, as you said, when I was 18. So it was a heck of a learning experience, and one that I just lapped up like blotting paper.
That would have been incredible. I think at that stage there wasn't actually an age limit. Now I think you've got to be 18, haven't you, before you're allowed to sail in the Sydney to Hobart?
Quite correct, yeah. One of the findings of the Sydney to Hobart inquiry in 1998 was that one of the results was that you had to be 18 or over to compete in future races.
Yes, that certainly is the case. Now, you then sailed Polaris around Australia. And somewhere in all of this, Tony, you spent time in PNG and you won the championships, the PNG championships. I spent a lot of time there in the 1960s. So I was fascinated to hear about that.
Yeah, I didn't spend a lot of time in PNG. I ended up living in Cairns for 6 years, from when I was 20 till I was 26. I sailed in there on a yacht, helping deliver a yacht from New Zealand to Perth via the top of Australia. And I was meant to stay a weekend, and 6 years later, I finally got out of the place.
Right.
And whilst I was there, I raced laser one-man dinghies quite competitively. And I was the Queensland champion for a while. And I was invited to go to New Guinea and compete in their national titles, which I did. And it was a fantastic experience. And I was lucky enough to win that regatta as well.
How terrific. And sailing around Australia?
Yeah, in 1993, I was coming to the end. I guess it's like chapters of a book. A fairly substantial chapter of my book of life was about to close and change, in that my racing career was about to wind down. And I got the idea of sailing two-handed non-stop around Australia. So in 1994, in March of that year, myself and my very good friend Maury Morgan, we sailed out of Newcastle Harbour, we turned left, and we just kept turning left all the time. And we went all the way around Australia, including Tasmania, and 54 days later, without stepping on shore anywhere, we sailed back into Newcastle Harbour.
That would have been an incredible sail, because there's some pretty rough waters, particularly going around the west coast there, isn't there?
Yeah, look, you can segment, I guess any trip of life you can segment down, break it down. So the first bit up the coast to the top of Cape York was, sailing through the reefs and the islands of the Barrier Reef and looking out for other vessels was pretty, a bit difficult at times. Across the top, heat and the humidity and not much wind. And then we were at the back end of the cyclone season, so we got hunted down by a Cyclone
Wow.
Vivian, and we ended up having to anchor and seek shelter, which under the rules of the attempt you're allowed to do. Then we had like about 2 weeks of sailing hard on the wind down the west coast of Australia, and then we had the Southern Ocean to contend with, heading across towards Tasmania. So very distinct legs of the trip, but all in all, I remember the day that we pulled up out the front of Newcastle Harbour to come in, and I looked at Maury and I said, well, what do you think about that, Maury? There's another 54 days that we haven't had to go to work, and we both laughed very loudly.
How lovely, how lovely. Now, but now, Tony, we'll move on a little bit to the Sydney to Hobart in 1998, which, of course, was the worst conditions that have ever been encountered for many, many years in the Sydney to Hobart. I was actually living in Hobart at that stage, so I was on Constitution Dock when it was all going on. And you, of course, were out there with your crew. Tell us more about that.
The little backstory to that is that 1.5 years prior to that, I'd committed myself to attempting to sail solo, non-stop and unassisted around the world. And so the reason we were in the 98 race was to test the boat, test the systems that I'd modified and put on board, and that I was hoping to come back from the 98 Hobart with a more concise list of jobs to do before departing on the around the world attempt. But of course, the 98 race, as most informed listeners will know, was by far suffered the worst conditions ever. We spent 15 hours thinking that we had found out how we were going to die on my boat. We thought we were going to drown. I ended up having 3 men airlifted to a rescue chopper, 2 more put on a warship, and myself and Snapey was there with me.
Right.
And Keith Malloy, the 3 of us stayed on the boat until we were eventually towed into Eden some days after all the maelstrom, let loose.
It was an incredible race. You, of course, did a capsize and lost your mast, didn't you?
Yeah, we started on the Boxing Day at 1 p.m. and then the next day the conditions were really ferocious in the afternoon of the Sunday. And it was around about 4 o'clock on that Sunday afternoon that we added this 15-hour period of a fight for survival, and it started by being completely turned upside down. Solo Globe Challenger was 43 feet long, 8.5 tonne. We had 4 men on deck, 4 down below, and this wave came along and just completely inverted us and swept us down the face of a 60-foot wave upside down.
Just incredible. And those, sadly, on the Winston Churchill, which was also in that race, there were a number of people that did sadly perish. 6
men died from 3 different boats. No one died on our boat. 3 of those men were from Winston Churchill. 2 were from a Tasmanian boat called Business Post Naiad.
Yes.
And 1 was another New South Wales boat called Sword of Orion.
It is a notorious stretch of water. I've sailed over it in our own yacht 4 or 5 times, and I must admit I have been in absolute terror a couple of times, but then it's been absolutely beautiful the other couple of times. But it's just extremely unpredictable, isn't it? But they were really rough conditions you were out in.
Yeah. Look, I'm a great, I think anyone that's been to sea can understand and know that the ocean can be your best friend or it can be your worst nightmare. And for that period of time, it was our worst nightmare by far. It was your worst nightmare on steroids. The waves were on average 60 to 70 feet, and they were like vertical cliffs. They're up to 100 foot high. And the wind strength for a consistent 15-hour period was around about 150 kilometres per hour. So yeah, it was out there on the edge type stuff, that's for sure.
It's extraordinary. Can you remember offhand, Tony, how many boats were able to finish?
There were 115 boats started in the race, and I think 40-something finished. And 55 people were rescued, and a number of boats sank.
Fortunately, there's been very rough conditions, but there haven't been conditions that have been as bad as that since, have there?
No, they've enacted, as I said earlier on, as a result of the various inquiries from the 98 race, they've enacted various rules and regulations now. So it's much more stringent. However, the thing that everyone needs to understand is that you can't beat it. One day it will happen again. It may be a long time down the track, but people shouldn't forget that, when nature wants to run the show, it runs the show.
And the problem is, of course, that there might be sort of a good weather force or a reasonable weather forecast to begin with from Sydney, but as we both know, it can change so drastically. But do you think there ever would be a time, if conditions were as bad as that again, that the organisers would in actual fact cancel the race?
I don't think so. There is a rule that says it's the individual skipper's decision to start and or continue to race. No one makes you go out there and no one makes you stay out there. Now, that's just not like a fallback position or a get out of jail card free. It's a fact. And so, we're big boys and girls and we can make our own decisions and we can gather our own information. There were things about the 98 race that weren't immediately apparent to us about not so much just the wind strength. There were lots of other things that came into play, one of which was an incredibly strong south-running current.
Right.
And that current hit 150 kilometres an hour of wind, and that's why the waves were so big and out of control.
Right.
No, I don't think so, but we'll see. A lot of people have mentioned that in times gone by, but I don't think that will happen, but it could do.
That's interesting to get your point of view on that, because I did wonder. Now, you're listening to Lots to Chat About. I'm Rosemary Peterswald, and my guest today is Tony Mowbray, adventurer, author and public speaker. But now, Tony, no sooner had you, more or less recovered from that ordeal, you in actual fact got your Solo Globe Challenge back up to Newcastle, but then you decided to fulfill your dream and sail solo around the world. Now, gosh, that was a huge undertaking, and not only for you, but I would imagine also for your family.
Oh, look, incredible team event in so many ways. The 98 Hobart race blew me out of the water, financially, emotionally and psychologically. And I say any other word that ends in AWLY.
Right.
But I walked away from the around the world trip. I said, you can take it and keep it. But then the human mind being what it is can rationalise out most things, I believe. And over the next 4 months, I really put myself through all sorts of agony, mental agony. Didn't speak to anyone about it. But I recommitted to the around the world trip in early May of 99. I delayed it by a year, and in October 2000, I sailed out of Newcastle Harbour. At the time that I did that, only 5 Australians had ever achieved the goal.
Right.
And I was, as you might imagine, and as the listeners might imagine, I had all sorts of fears. I wasn't right. Emotionally, I was still scarred, and I still am to a certain degree.
Right.
But I just hoped that as time went by that I'd come good, sort of thing, in inverted commas. Get back on the horse type of thing.
Well, it's certainly some way of getting back on the horse, I can I can tell you. It's not as I would probably not realise until I read your book, but I have actually read Kay Cotty's book and I have read Jesse Martin's book, and getting sponsorship is not as easy as it sounds, is it? And you ran into a few hurdles until, you were very, very lucky. At least you had food to eat because you had Bilo that sponsored you. But just tell us a little bit about trying to get sponsorship for such an ordeal.
Yeah, look, after the 98 Hobart and with other things that we had done, I had a reasonably high public profile, particularly in and around our local area here, around Newcastle, Lake Macquarie. And I felt that it would be fairly easy to secure some funding to help me with it. I view sponsorship as a two-way agreement. It's not a donation, I'm not a charity. I'm the person that if you sponsor me or support me, I'm the person that I don't want to leave the bar owing you a drink.
Right.
I want to make sure that I give you back more than what you expect. So I had a pretty good, strong mindset about it. I felt I had a good track record. I could articulate. I felt that I'd be good in front of a radio microphone or a television camera for sponsors, et cetera, et cetera. But honestly, it apart from the emotional challenge of because when I committed to the around the world trip, my daughter Holly was 5, my son was 3, and apart from the emotional challenge, trying to pay for it was just gut wrenching, just
Yes.
soul destroying. And I can understand why, because a lot of people, their eyes would glaze over. They'd say, "Oh, solo sailor. Oh, he'll probably sail off over the horizon, and we'll never hear from him again." And
Yes.
that's a reasonable thing to assume.
Right.
So, but what it did, it made me stronger. And small fish are sweet. So I spent, for example, I had a program where you could sponsor me for one or more days of the trip, and it cost you $500.
Right.
And for that, you received value in various ways. But I sold about 80 of those, so I raised about $40,000 from that. And
Oh, right.
what I used to do is on Monday morning, I'd think, right, my job today so far is to go out and get 2 one-day sponsors for $500 each. And I figured that would take care of my family's budgets.
Yes.
And then until I'd done that, I wouldn't do anything else, wouldn't work on the boat until I'd secured those two single-day sponsorships.
And Bilo came to your aid there, and I gather you lived on there. Well, you were very, very sad when the fruitcake ran out.
Yeah, Bilo. Bilo, some of the listeners may recall Bilo, and they were a fully owned subsidiary of Coles supermarkets.
Yes.
And I entered into an arrangement with Bilo where they were my food sponsor because I thought the trip would take about 6 months, but everything I did, I built a 3-month safety buffer. So I had to have 9 months worth of food. And then also my wife and children had to eat whilst I was out there. So Lorraine was able to go to a Bilo supermarket here at Mount Hutton, where it was at the time, and she was able to get a weekly groceries whilst I was out there. And I stocked up big time. And the joke is, but it's true, Bilo had a light fruitcake that I absolutely loved. And I took 45 of them, but I ate them all. Yeah, I took 45 light fruitcakes and I ate them all in the first 2 months. I just loved them.
But actually, Tony, you weren't on that boat on your own, were you? Because you had you had 2 friends and you had a bear.
Yeah, look, before I left, I used to get asked the question a lot by people who didn't know me. They'd say, "Oh, how do you think you're going to cope with the loneliness?" And it was quite a valid question, and it was repeated regularly. And I used to give some long-winded philosophical answer. And then one day I was talking to Dave Cook, one of my 98 Hobart crew, about it. And he said, "Oh, that's easy." He said, "Just tell them you've got some imaginary friends."
Right.
So I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So the first person that I replied to their question about the loneliness, I said, "Oh, that's okay. I've got my imaginary friends." And I swear they took half a step backwards.
Right.
And I thought, oh my God. So then I thought this had the desired effect. So then I gave them names. I called them Kevin and Frank, and then they became Kevin and Frankie Babe. And people used to say,
lovely.
"How come you haven't got a female imaginary friend?" And I'd say, "Well, how do you know Frankie Babe's not a girl?" So the joke went on.
Right. Yes.
I had you talk about Billy the Bear.
Yes.
That's on a more somber note. So very, very close friends of mine are Craig and Jenny Butters. And they had 3 sons, and the middle son was Nicholas. And Nicholas, at the time of my departure, had been fighting a debilitating brain cancer, brain tumour for a number of years. And his mum and dad, Craig and Jenny, had been, pulling out all stops to extend his life. So on the morning that I left, Nicholas, who was one of my favourite people in the world, and his parents and his brothers came around. They gave me a little toy koala bear. And I took him down below on a cable and tied him to the mast down below decks, and that's where he stayed for 6 months.
Right.
And then when I came back, I released him from his cable ties.
Yes.
And I crossed the finish line, and I hadn't gone in to be greeted by the crowd at that point, but I had enjoyed a very personal moment with Nicholas where I handed him back Billy into his care.
Oh, how lovely.
And Billy the bear is Nicholas has since passed away some years ago, but Billy the bear still sits in his bedroom.
Oh, isn't that's a lovely, lovely story, Tony. Tony, I mean, coming back, I mean, you actually suffered one of the worst nights of your whole trip was actually just before you did finish the race, didn't you?
Yeah, it wasn't a race. It was just my own
Not the
personal.
race, sorry, the circumnavigation, yeah.
That's all right. Yeah, look, I was out there for 181 days in total, and some stats on that is that I only saw land for a total of 3 days, and I didn't see a human being in all that time, which was, in my books, pretty bloody good, with all due respect to the listeners. In the 6 months I was out there, I only truly had my back to the wall twice in full-blown survival mode.
Right.
The first time was after 5 months, and I was off southwest of Perth. But then the second time was really hard to cope with emotionally because I was at the top end of Bass Strait, almost in the identical position that it had brought us undone in 1998. And I had a massive storm that swept down on me. It doubled down on itself. And the chapter in the book that deals with that night is called A Night of Lunacy.
And it sounded like it.
It just was lunacy. I just thought I was going to die. But what was really tough was just 250 miles up the track is the finish line. After all these years of effort, but so often accidents happen when you're so close to home, don't they? So I really toughed it out that night. But we got through it. What I did find out later on, although it took me a few months to piece all the pieces of the jigsaw together, is that night in that same storm, 3 more men died on a charter fishing boat called the Margaret J that had left Burnie.
I know.
And that really shook me to my core. I was really pretty, and still am.
It's the sea is so unpredictable. I mean, Jessica Watson, she actually had a huge storm when she was south of Tasmania, I think, from memory, when she was nearly at the end of the finishing line. But Tony, I mean, it was amazing when you arrived back into Newcastle. There were 30 or 40,000 people there to welcome you, weren't there?
Yeah, about 30,000. Well, look. When I get a lot of people that come to me now and over the years and ask me, they want to sail around the world, solo, et cetera, and will I help them? And one of the first things I try to ascertain is what's their motivation, what's driving them. And if they think they're going to be rich and famous and all that, I'm not really that interested. But if they're coming from within, it's from their spirit, or there's some undefined thing that's forcing them to do it, then I'm interested to go to the next step. Right. So I never ever did it seeking the applause or the acclamation of other people, but when I left, I had about 500 people.
Yes.
But then what happened was throughout the course of the journey, our local community just recognised it, and they realised I'm just a bloke from Belmont, just having a go.
Yeah.
And people, they were able to live an adventure vicariously through my efforts, I guess. And I tried to say we, not I. And so, there were 30,000 people there, which was just completely off the dial.
Yeah.
And one photograph in the book depicts some of that crowd, and it's like, holy hell, what the heck?
It's incredible. Now, Kay Cotty wrote another book after she came back, and it was called All at Sea at Home, because she found it very hard to adjust. Did you find the same, Tony? I mean, I know you've gone on to other adventures, which we'll talk about in a minute, but did you find that difficult?
No. The day that I stepped ashore in front of those 30,000 people, I had a certain level of debt. It was manageable, but I had a certain level of debt. My children, I had deprived them of a lot over the preceding years, and my wife, Lorraine, at the time. And so I needed to go to work. I needed to start to repay the emotional debt to them.
Yes.
And I needed to start and build our asset base again. So I joke about it, but I stepped ashore, someone gave me a mobile phone, and I was back in business. I had decided prior to leaving for the trip, and particularly whilst I was out there, that I wanted to be a corporate speaker. And I'd read about people that had, achieved things and done. So I thought, that sounds pretty good. And I'd done a little bit of it. So on day one, in my mind, I was a corporate speaker.
Right.
And I set about being very proactive. And I found that money is a byproduct. But what I found in the end was that the essence of me as a speaker was trying to share my experiences with people who might, trying to sound humble but probably not succeeding, share my experiences with people and some of my learnings and some of my realisations so that it might help them in their life in some way, shape or form.
How wonderful.
That's why I do it. The money is a necessary evil, but unfortunately.
But you are, I don't know, you sort of put yourself out there, don't you? Because, I mean, you weren't home all that long, and then you did another City to Hobart with the same crew.
Yeah, well, before I left on the Around the World trip, I said to my 7 crew from the Hobart, including Snapey, I said, look, while I'm away on the around the world trip, I don't even know if I'll get back from this. I might die, and I don't know what state the boat will be in or whatever when I get back. But think about this idea. And the idea was that we might go back and do the Hobart again, just to put an exclamation mark on that experience. And so just 8 months after I finished in front of 30,000 people, just 240 days after all those years of effort, the same 8 of us in the same boat, we did cross the finish line in the 2001 Sydney to Hobart, and then that chapter was over.
That was an incredible chapter too. But in 2003, you mounted your first Antarctic expedition with taking 2 non-sailors to the windiest place on Earth at sea level. But they sort of returned with their lives changed forever. They
did. I got the idea in 2002. I'd started thinking about it at the back end of the around the world trip. What's next for me? What's over the metaphorical horizon, so to speak. And so I decided to go down to Antarctica. I went down to Mawson's Hut. I actually took 4 people with me whose lives were changed forever, as was mine. And they were non-sailors, but they had a whole skill set in various aspects of their lives that I didn't have. Like, one was an unemployed comedian. Think about that for a minute. How funny was he really?
Right.
But we went down to Mawson's Hut, due south of Tasmania. It was a 7-week expedition. We went to what is freely acknowledged as the windiest place on Earth at sea level. Winds have been recorded there of 340 kilometres per hour, unbelievably. We didn't get anything like that, but we certainly had a very adventurous time. And when I came back from Mawson's Hut, my life was continuing to be changed. A cameraman put a television camera in my face, and the little journalist, she said, and I'm pretty chilled, she said, Mr. Mowbray, how did Antarctica affect you? And I've just stared at the lens on the thing, and I'm just so chilled. And my answer was, I want my children to see an iceberg.
Oh, how wonderful. Now, Tony, you've got so much to talk about. So your career as a public speaker has been and continues to be incredible, with all those adventures, behind you and probably to come. But you're even going to be a speaker, I think, at the Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron in December. Is that right?
I am. I've been approached by the Royal Queensland Yacht Squadron at Manly to be up there. It's Wednesday. I think it's the 3rd of December.
Terrific.
Just bear with me for 1 minute. I'll just confirm that. But so what we're going up. It's on a Wednesday, and I'm not being paid to do it. I've been approached to go up there, so we're driving up at my expense. And it's Wednesday, the 3rd of December, and I think it starts at 6 or 6:30. They go to their website, they can suss it all out.
Terrific.
And I'm going up there to talk about the book that I've just published, self-published, and also the 2 cornerstone events of '98 and the around the world trip, and expand upon those.
Oh, that'll be terrific. I mean, the book for our listeners, remember again, is called Never, Ever Give In by Tony Mowbray. Yeah. But Tony, sadly, we have run out of time, because I could go on talking to you for quite a while, but Paul is waving through the window there. And I daren't go over time. But look, thank you, Tony Mowbray, for being my guest. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Paul, for producing. That was incredible,
Thank you.
Wasn't it?
Awesome, that one. Yes.
You want to take off around the world?
Don't know yet. I talked about doing the Sydney to Hobart with my wife, and she is not impressed.
Oh, right.
Well, Paul, if you want to give me a call about that, there's as you would probably know, I'm not saying you're disabled, so don't get me wrong there, but there was a guy called David Pescott who ran a program called Sailors with Disabilities for a long time, and some of my mates actually sailed with David. It's a hell of a look. Some people do one Sydney Hobart and go, "You're kidding me, I'm out of here," and others do one and go, "Let me at it again." So who would know which group you might fall into?
Yeah, not sure. I'll have to think about it for a bit more, I think.
Right.
Give me a ring sometime, mate. You got my number there. Give me a ring.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking. Now, just Tony's website is tonymowbray.com.au. That's the best way people can get in touch with you, Tony?
Yeah, my phone number's on there. I'm fairly contactable. Yep. It's not hard to find me. And if anyone wants to give me a ring and just have a yarn, or you can buy a book on the site, whatever you like, just do it. That's
terrific. Now, thank you again, Tony Mowbray, for being my guest. And this program has been produced in the studios of 4RPH Brisbane for syndication, reading radio, I should say, for syndication around Australia, and will be available on my YouTube channel, Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Paul, for producing.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.